This is groundbreaking. It's history making. It is the boldest regulatory move that I have seen in my 30-year career. I give the province a lot of credit for leading the conversation when it comes to change. The housing wheel, right? The system needs to be broken, that wheel. This isn't about just making amendments to the speed of that system or tinkering with it. It's about wholesale change. And that change is not easy. So number one, I give the province a lot of credit for leading that. And number two, there's going to be some strain with municipalities. We are an over-regulated environment in an industry that needs to be nimble and quick. That's what's happened.
Being in the development industry and working with city halls over the last 6 years, I am somewhat skeptical that city halls will be able to execute on these policy requirements. It's taken me 3-4 years to get 100 units approved. Seeing city halls being able to adapt.
Only 3 years? That's
in the best
that's
case scenario.
that's pretty
How
quick in
how,
some cases.
how are city halls going to implement pre-zoning for tens of thousands of units in 6 months?
They won't be able to do it comprehensively in 6 months, but they'll get a good head start. The land use part, and I would argue the most politicized part, how much, how tall, the volume of development will now have been determined. That is a big part of the equation. So at least that has been dealt with. The status quo and the crawl that we have to go through to create homes for people is not working. So we need to do something big. So let's just remove the politicization of housing when it comes to a lower mid-density form and allow that to proceed with some certainty. I am optimistic. You can trust me, Bill. I think this is going to work. You can trust me so much that we color coordinated today. This was not planned. It's not like Bill called me and said, I want you to wear some baby blues to match me, but yeah, you can trust me. I think this is going to work. Our human species and how we inhabit this planet has been a consistent pattern of urbanization over the last 100 years, and it's continuing to get exacerbated and worse. That pressure on our cities with the amount of housing supply that we are creating is not keeping up. I think there's going to be some municipalities that will resist this and will find other excuses and reasons not to proceed with it, saying, well, we're going to have an infrastructure deficit, so we don't know what to do. I don't buy that argument. I think a lot of this infrastructure, and Bill, you would know this from other work that you've done, is funded by the development industry. As a part of development, there is a small municipal assist factor, but I think years from now, people will look back and say that it was the right thing to do. Change is not easy. Bold decisions are not easy.
Welcome to Laidler Academy. This week, our host Bill Laidler sits down with Gary Pooni, president of Pooni Group, to discuss the realities of urban planning, recent provincial housing policy changes, and what lies ahead for the industry and municipalities. A driving force behind shaping engaged, resilient, and livable cities, Pooni Group works on some of Canada's most impactful land development projects to move communities forward into the future.
Welcome, Gary Pooni with Pooni Group to Laidler Academy. Pooni Group leads the development industry in public consultation and assisting with policy, coordinating between city staff and developers. Gary, how did you start Pooni Group, and where do you see your role in the development industry now?
Good question. So you want my OG story. It's a step back from Pooni Group and the company. I am the son of Indian immigrant, grew up on a farm. We grew our own food. And then over time, started to see just growth pressures on this little part of Queensborough in between New Westminster and the Hamilton area of Richmond. So out of that, eventually, my dad, having been in the construction industry for decades, saw that something was happening and said, go to City Hall and see what's going on with our land. We're getting these unsolicited offers from real estate agents and people just knocking on our door. So I did. We went to City Hall and saw that our land had been designated as multifamily. So that kind of piqued my curiosity around what is this process of changing a land's designation and how is that governed? And with my father having worked in the construction industry with Southwest Contracting, with Mill and Illich's, Progressive Construction, with the Boza family when it was Boza Brothers construction. So kind of in the early pioneering days of building this region, my father and my family had been a part of it. The rest is quite boring. I got my bachelor's in geography and then went to grad school in Calgary to get my master's degree in urban planning, and then it went from there. Worked at the city of Calgary for a while, worked in consulting in a great practice led by Greg Brown in Calgary for a number of years, and then decided to move back home. We came back here, and I began work with the Port Authority, with the Port of Vancouver. Very short history there. And then coming up on 20 years, this February, I had joined this firm and then became the sole partner. We had partners previously. It was with Chuck Brook and Laurie Schmidt. Everybody kind of has gone off and is doing their own thing now. And then we rebranded as Pooni Group later. So that's kind of the history of, I think it's more interesting to learn what got me into urban planning and this industry than it is about the company. There was a history here already as a company when it was its predecessor, right before I came in. And I was just able to sort of carve it into a company that was consistent with my own team skill set and our own personality.
What is Pooni Group's core role in development industry now?
Our core role, there's three parts of urban planning, right? There is a technical part to it, which is the more pure planning. There is a public consultation / PR part of it. That's sort of prong number two. And the third one is there's a political aspect to it. We live in a political arena where you need political approvals. So it's all three of those that our company gets involved in. Publicly, it's seen more on the public engagement or on a political side. But the secret really is there's a lot of technical planning work that we do that is not public, and that is a big part in terms of the labor of what our team produces. So some people see us like marriage counselors, right, where we're intervening when a city hall and a developer aren't getting along. We do that. Or when a community and a developer aren't getting along, we kind of insert ourselves there. Try and put ourselves as a peg in the middle of all of these forces between city hall, developer, and the public, between approval agencies, people, and a developer's interest, and try and find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle.
I had the good fortune to work with your team and had an excellent experience.
Good. At least there was one. We're glad to hear that. We'll put you on our Christmas card list.
I may still be on it. But one of the values that I appreciated was Pooni Group providing us with the urban planning policy best practices from a theoretical point of view. Gary, can you speak to what the fundamental issue within the Vancouver housing market is?
Yes. Short question, big answer. Being a planner, I like to take a look at where our cities have come from and then where we're headed. And so there's just so much that is going on in our cities. And the plans that we're coming up with now are reacting to problems from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and are so reactive that we don't have the chance to look ahead, right? There's a wave of things that are hitting us. Seniors care, for example. My mom is quite ill and she's in a senior's home, and I'm quite concerned about who's going to take care of our seniors moving forward, because I think we're so far behind in that space. We're very focused on housing affordability and homelessness, yes, but these are problems that have been exacerbated as each year goes on. It's not as simple as a supply and demand argument. Our cities have been growing exponentially since the 1950s. Take a look at the last pandemic 100 years ago and what happened with our cities then. There were, I think at that time, 50 million people that had been infected and tens of millions that had passed away. We were coming out of World War I, and all of this led to the Great Depression. For a short period of time, we had the Roaring 20s, but that really just masked what was coming with our Great Depression, with an economic run-up that could not be sustained, and it led to the terrible 30s. And out of that, there were some positive things that happened. Great technological advances. Radio became a way for people to connect, similar to like what we're doing here on an online platform or Zoom. Like that has completely taken off during COVID and hopefully post-COVID. So our cities, with those technological advances, the rapid urbanization, people moving into our cities, the growth pressures and the urban growth pressures, as well as the cultural tensions that were created, and it led to a lot of harm, a lot of global harm. You could say, historians might say, there's a lot of that just led to nationalistic thinking and World War II. I don't want to get into something like that, but the pressure that was put onto our cities at that time, take that aside from sort of the global political things that were going on, that has continued. And so we have, I think in 2014, 51% of the population globally now lived in cities. And that is the first time in history that more people were living in cities than not. Since that time, continue to increase. So we concentrate the majority of our GDP and economic growth in cities. Our populations are attracted to employment and jobs. We've done a great job, especially in Vancouver, creating a good urban setting. I'm not just talking about Vancouver, but it's our region. And you can take it from Squamish all the way up to Chilliwack as being the southern BC region. And a little bit of urban flight during the pandemic, but it was only people sort of leaving the center of the hot plate to a little bit further away. It would be people leaving downtown, Bill, to move into your project in Port Moody. That's still within our urban area. So your question was, what is going on in our housing market? And I've just given a lot of color and commentary to take a look at how our human species and how we inhabit this planet has been a consistent pattern of urbanization over the last 100 years, and it's continuing to get exacerbated and worse. That pressure on our cities with the amount of housing supply that we are creating is not keeping up. That's the disconnect in the equation. Let's attract people to Canada. Let's attract people to our urban centers. Let's attract economic development and jobs into our cities, and then not build enough housing to keep up with it. That's the fundamental issue. So out of that, that's a long way of the first part of the question. Abbreviated version of the next is, in our last pandemic and what's happening again now, when there was rapid technological advances and rapid urbanization, rapid growth of our cities, that we are an over-regulated environment in an industry that needs to be nimble and quick. That's what's happened. So a lot of city halls that you walk into now, the answer is no, this cannot happen because we created policy around this 5 years ago or 7 years ago. And the change that is happening is much more rapid. That policy is static, frozen, right? And then you have an industry and cities that are so dynamic and changing. And our pandemic is a great example of how quickly change was happening. And so that is part two of the breakdown in my mind in terms of the equation that is affecting the growth of our cities and housing pressures.
The province of BC is making major announcements to address the supply side of this issue. What do you make of the TOD requirements and multiple units on all single family lots?
This is groundbreaking. It's history making. It is the boldest regulatory move that I have seen in my 30-year career. I give the province a lot of credit for leading the conversation when it comes to change. The housing wheel, right? The system needs to be broken, that wheel. This isn't about just making amendments to the speed of that system or tinkering with it. It's about wholesale change. And that change is not easy. I think for people right now are just witnessing regulations and law that will come into effect. It'll feel different when it's on the ground, and that change is going to be hard for some people. But I think for that next generation, I'm 52 years old, and I'm getting a bit old to be affected by some of this. Right? This is the future of housing for our young people, for my son, his friends, young people in my office. This is a change that's going to be needed. It'll look similar. A lot of people have been saying, hey, we need to take a older European city growth model, and there is medium density development in a lot of urban centers in Europe. It's not largely around single family housing. That is seen as something that is not normal. So number one, I give the province a lot of credit for leading that. And number two, there's going to be some strain with municipalities. I think the ones that have been embracing growth and change in those councils will look at this for some cover and for some consistency when it comes to thinking. I think there's going to be some municipalities that will resist this and will find other excuses and reasons not to proceed with it, saying, well, we're going to have an infrastructure deficit, so we don't know what to do. I don't buy that argument. I think a lot of this infrastructure, and Bill, you would know this from other work that you've done, is funded by the development industry. As a part of development, there is a small municipal assist factor, but a large part of it is driven within certain areas with development cost charges and development cost levies. So this is the type of nimble, dynamic thinking and changes that are required to make wholesale changes to a system. Long answer, but I think years from now, people will look back and say that it was the right thing to do. Change is not easy. Bold decisions are not easy.
How, being in the development industry and working with city halls over the last 6 years, I am somewhat skeptical that city halls will be able to execute on these policy requirements. It's taken me 3-4 years to get 100 units approved. Seeing city halls being able to adapt
Only 3 years? That's
in the best
that's
case
pretty,
scenario,
that's pretty
how
quick
are,
in
how,
some cases.
how are city halls going to implement pre-zoning for tens of thousands of units in 6 months?
They won't be able to. They won't be able to do it comprehensively in 6 months, but they'll get a good head start. So, if you have the certainty of the land use in place, there's two parts to it. One, now you have the math of in infrastructure, carrying capacity of the land, and you can say there's going to be X amount of people in certain areas. So there's a technical analysis that needs to happen there. But the land use part, and I would argue the most politicized part, how much, how tall, the volume of development will now have been determined. That is a big part of the equation. So at least that has been dealt with. And we can actually get into a very forward thinking, technical thinking about how we're going to accommodate that amount of housing instead of determining how much are we actually going to create here. That's the difference. And number two would be this, Bill, doing things the way that we have been doing it over the last 10, 15 years is not working. The status quo and the crawl that we have to go through to create homes for people is not working. So we need to do something big. So being skeptical is very natural given the history of working relationships. The public is skeptical of City Hall. Our industry is skeptical. City Hall is skeptical of our industry and what our intentions might be, right? It works all ways. Public is skeptical of us and our industry. So let's just remove the politicization of housing when it comes to a lower mid-density form and allow that to proceed with some certainty. I am optimistic. You can trust me, Bill. I think this is going to work. You can trust me so much that we color coordinated today. This was not planned. It's not like Bill called me and said, I want you to wear some baby blues to match me, but yeah, you can trust me. I think this is going to work.
I generally agree with you, and we're moving in the right direction. I'm more cautious on the timelines and whether we're going to be able to hit the timelines and whether this will be as fast as what we're initially seeing the policy announcements be.
Well, it's not going to be. I can tell you right now, the development industry, our industry, is going to say it's not fast enough. And you're going to have the public and City Hall say it's too fast. And this is probably somewhere in the middle. Hey, but at least we may not get everything right over the next 6 months, but we will get, again, the land use part will have been sorted out within that 6 months. And now we can start working on the other piece. It's not like housing is going to be created and built, but within that 6 months either. But it's a start, and it's in the near term future, right? We're not looking off too far.
Gary, I appreciate you taking the time. I could go on, or we could go on for significantly more hours. I have more questions that I would want to ask you. Gary, to finish the interview, what is something that people do not understand about the real estate industry?
Bill, I would say that people don't understand how stressful this industry can be, and finding ways to manage that stress and look after yourself. So 4 years ago, I had a massive heart attack. I went into cardiac arrest. My heart stopped. I was gone for almost 4 minutes and essentially died in front of my family. So I barely survived. It said a 0.1% chance of making it. Somehow I did. And I woke up out of a coma. And so coming out of that, I've made a lot of changes with the amount that I work, the amount of time and energy that I spend around certain parts of our industry. There's some things that we just can't change in our industry, and we get so stressed about it. But what I learned was the cumulative impact year after year of staying on your phone 24/7, working all the time, your mind not shutting off, and not taking care of yourself. So that's been a big learning experience for me, and I would not want what I went through to happen to anybody else in this industry. I would just ask that everybody take care of themselves, and if you're not feeling well, please go get checked out. And a shout out to the ER and the cardiac unit at Vancouver General Hospital, and my son for calling 911 for having saved my life. So my parting message to everyone here would be, please take care of yourself. it can be a very stressful industry, and we all owe it to each other to be around for a long time.
Thank you for sharing that, Gary. The work that you do is important, and that's a key message for all of us to take away. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill, and take care of yourself. Keep doing the great work that you've been doing. Appreciate it.
And I'm managing that stress like everybody else.
Yeah, take care of yourself, pal.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to another insightful episode of the Laidler Academy podcast. We hope you find today's discussion informative and inspiring. Here at Laidler Academy, we're committed to helping you unlock your potential and transform your life, providing the insights you need to succeed in real estate. If you have any specific topics or questions you'd like us to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us through social media or email info@laidleracademy.com. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode of the Laidler Academy podcast.